Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about Trump and saving America. Then Dr. Everett Piper joins me. Polling scams and the real-life meaning of the UAE-Israel deal. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Sometimes I start out the First Five by telling you a little story and kind of tying it into what we want to talk about today. But I want to start out first, the First Five, by saying 4 weeks from today is the election, the November 3rd, 2020 presidential elections. Entire Congress is up, as you well know, about a third of the Senate and the presidency of the United States, 4 weeks from today. Many people are saying that this is a turnout election. And in many cases, that is true. Both sides are working very hard to get their base to turn out. They've been working registering voters, or in some cases, registering illegal people who shouldn't really be voting, but I digress. Pushing with the idea that it is a turnout election. And it is, except for this fact. There is an effort, an ongoing, relentless, day-by-day effort of the Democrat media mob in this country to try to turn people away from support for President Trump. They use all sorts of tactics, all sorts of labels, all sorts of just twisting of facts. And I want to talk about that, about this idea of saving America. Because what really is going on in 2020 is an election between preserving America as founded, rooted in the foundational liberties spelled out in our Declaration of Independence, and moving forward with a nation that still respects the rule of law, the constitutional structure of our government, the rights guaranteed in our Bill of Rights. It's that America that has made us a capitalist, free market America. It is that America that has made us safe, prosperous, and moved our country to be where we are today, which is the leader of liberty in the world. Or the other choice is over the cliff to a country that you will not recognize in a few short years. It's a country moving towards socialism, a country where the rights spelled out in the Bill of Rights are treated more as suggestions, a country where the constitutional structure of government, the separation of powers, the rule of law, will be a vague, confusing, nebulous mess. But I want to focus in particular in the First Five today on what the voters, what the Democrat media mob tries to do in turning people away from President Trump. So here's my little story. So yesterday I happened to talk to a friend after I left the show. She was saying, well, you know, I've always voted Republican, and I agree with the Republicans, but I don't think that President Trump should have left Walter Reed Hospital and gotten into the limousine and driven around the hospital to wave to the crowds who were there supporting him, because he may have put Secret Service in danger. I mean, that is just not the action of a responsible person. You don't, when you know you have coronavirus, you're supposed to stay secluded. So he shouldn't have done that. So we had a conversation, and I went through some points I talked to her about, but I'm just using this as an example of the idea, a tactic the left uses, and you have to be alert to it, which is they try to find one little thing that might make you angry, might make you question the president, might make you think question his judgment or his decision on some issue, or the way he spoke or what he put in a tweet. And then they want to say to you, because I've now convinced you of this one thing, and you're agreeing with me that he shouldn't have done this or he shouldn't have said that, clearly you can't support him. People, we cannot get pushed off our game of preserving this country because somebody points out something that you may even strongly agree with that you think the president shouldn't have done, shouldn't have said. That's point number one. Don't let them play that game with you. Be smarter than that. Even if you want to say, yes, I absolutely agree that he should have stayed in that hospital room and quarantined for 14 days, even if that's what you think, it has nothing to do with preserving this country and moving this country forward. That's number one. Number two, there is a lot of attack on what President Trump had to say both in a tweet as well as in his verbal remarks after he came back, leaving Walter Reed Hospital and heading back to the White House. I sent Matt the Wonderful, who is indeed back. Yay, Matt is back. So Matt the Wonderful has a short clip from a tweet. This is what President Trump, just a short clip of his remarks as he came back to the White House.
I just left Walter Reed Medical Center, and it's really something very special. The doctors, the nurses, the first responders, and I learned so much about coronavirus. And one thing that's for certain, don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently. And you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good. And 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. Don't let it dominate. Don't let it take over your lives. Don't let that happen. We have the greatest country in the world. We're going back. We're going back to work. We're going to be out front.
Okay, I could tell you, folks, his remarks right there he's talking about triggered the left to near hysteria. I will spare you putting up so you can see some of the text messages and tweets that went out, just hysterical attack on the president. How dare he tell people not to be afraid? This is disrespectful to the people who lost their lives to COVID or who lost loved ones. No, it's not. And I want to remind you the famous words about fear, not being afraid, not being fearful, which have been revered for generations. We had FDR making the comments in 1933 where he said this great nation will endure as long as it has endured, will revive, will prosper. And he goes on to say, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. People used to love that. Democrat media mob used to love that because they recognized what FDR was helping people understand. Of course, we are facing a dangerous world. Of course, there are things that we might have challenges in front of us, and they might be really big challenges. Of course, we may actually have military conflict and lose lives. He wasn't saying, don't be fearful, everything's going to be perfect. He was pointing out we can't live in fear. And the reason the left is driven so insane by what Trump said is because what they've hoped ever since they had the coronavirus situation arise in America is that the left thrives on and gains power from the fear, the amount of fear the American people feel. And this is why the left was so triggered by what Trump said, because he's telling them, hey, I've been through it. You know, it's not wonderful. It's not great. But we don't have to fear. We can get through this. The left does not want you to think that. The left wants the American people to think, and that, I always remind my friend always says, say the anti-American left. The anti-American left does not want the American people to think that we can get through this without massive fear, continued shutdown, a shutdown of our economy, our society, our social order, our churches, our lives, our businesses. The left thrives on fear. They get power. The more the American people are afraid, the more they will act like sheep instead of individual Americans. The left gains power over them. The left is hysterical mostly because President Trump dared to point out, let's not be fearful. So, number two in President Trump, they attack him all the time, trying to get you angry with him. This is a great example where he said he made remarks akin to among the most famous remarks in American history about don't fear, or fear itself is a problem, and the left is triggered. So I won't even read their tweets, but I do want to make one other point just generically about the election cycle as I close out the first five, and we're talking here about Trump and saving America. This is a Save America election. You can't get hung up on voting for the man, Trump, versus the man, Biden. I don't care if you like President Biden better, Vice President Biden better. I don't care if you think he's a nicer person. What his party will do to this country is destroy it. It doesn't matter if he seems nicer to you. What matters is what the parties stand for, what the agenda is the individual candidate is running on. You've seen the Trump agenda. You've seen prosperity. You've seen strength returning to America. You've seen in America a newly restored sense of love of America, strength of America under President Trump. You've seen this survival, this fighter attitude that was so great to hear from President Trump as he left Walter Reed Hospital. And you hear from the left, the radical leftist agenda that is in the streets of our cities, that is never denounced by anyone, including Biden, barely can denounce Antifa or Black Lives Matter or Marxism or socialism. He can't do it because that is his party. I'll make one analogy to you for closing out this first five. People have jobs in professional sports, NFL, NBA, baseball, all that. And the job is called scouting. They go out and they find talent. And so when they find someone, they bring him back and say, yep, this is the person that we think you should try out and you should consider for quarterback or the pitcher or the center, whatever the sport is. They don't go find the nicest person. They don't go find the person who does not offend them by their manner of speaking or by their tweets or by their hairstyle or even by their personal life history. They find the person who can do the job. Do the job. That is the reason the scouts have a job. They're supposed to come back and say, yeah, this is the guy, this is the one who can be the quarterback and win games for us, or the pitcher, or the center, or whatever the position is in any sport. They're out to get the best person for the job. Well, that's the same job you have in this election cycle. Pick the person who will keep America on track as a free, prosperous, noble nation, as a strong nation rooted in liberty, a strong nation that protects the rights guaranteed to us in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's what your job is. You're like the scout for the NFL. You're finding the best person for the job, not the person who you like the best or you think has the best manners. Because if we went down that route, who knows? We might have had Mitt Romney or someone like that who clearly has no fight in him. But where we ended up, because the American people saw through the attacks on President Trump in 2016, we ended up with a man taking the presidency who is putting this country back on track. We've got to do exactly the same thing in this election cycle. Choose the man who can do the job. And that, my very fine friends, is today's first five. Well, I mentioned before we started today that we have a guest joining us. Fortunately for me, he comes on about once a month. This is Dr. Everett Piper, and he's joining us today by phone. If you recognize the name, which I'm sure many of you do, I always tout the one book he wrote because I just love it. It's called Not a Daycare, which is a book that was a spin-off of an article he wrote when he was president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, a position he held for 17 years. But the national bestseller book was called Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. And so we have the great privilege, when we have him on, we sometimes may make reference to the book, but we talk about a lot of the things. He's a fabulous conservative commentator in America, a columnist for Washington Times, and we have indeed joining us on the phone Dr. Everett Piper. Hello, sir.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Love when you come on. So let's just start with your column, which we were emailing back and forth. You have a column which actually ties in well with my comments in the first five. I don't care if Donald Trump is a jerk. He still has my vote, which was the closing line. It's a great caption. Well, what are you talking about? What do you mean, even if he's a jerk, he has your vote?
I'm referring to the debate. Honestly, and some people listening to your show right now aren't going to like what I say next. I think Donald Trump was rude and caustic and inappropriate in the debate. It bothered me. I don't think he should have interrupted as much as he did. But I don't care. I'm not going to change my vote because Donald Trump was a jerk during the debate. Conservatives don't vote for ideologues. This is the point you made in the first five. Conservatives don't vote for ideologues. Conservatives vote for ideas. We vote for a constitution. We don't vote for a king. We vote for the covenant. The covenant, as Os Guinness has said. The covenant. We vote to maintain the covenant, the Magna Carta, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers. We vote for the ideas that have served to give the greatest measure of human freedom in the history of humanity. That's what conservatives do. We don't care if our leader is a jackass. It doesn't make any difference. It's said that Winston Churchill was rude and caustic, off-putting and acerbic and arrogant. Thank God for Winston Churchill. We need a Churchill today. We don't need a Chamberlain. We need a Pitbull. We don't need a Patsy. I thank the Lord for Donald Trump, even though his mannerisms and behavior at times are different than what I would hope he would show us. But who cares? Who cares? That's not what I'm voting for. I'm voting for policies. Policies, 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 not the person.
I love that. Amen to that. One of my points I'm going to make probably every show between now and Election Day in 4 weeks is the idea that you're choosing America's future. And you can choose a future that continues to uphold the ideas of America, that preserves America, or a future kind of like the people chose in Venezuela in 1997 when they thought it was a really swell idea to bring in a new guy because, he was promising free everything. And besides that, he said he was willing to be caustic and accusatory toward the rich, and he was willing to promise everything for free. And golly gee, in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez promised the moon. And that's kind of where we are right now, where we have the left promising things that are not economically feasible, but they sound really, really good. But they aren't ideas, they're just shallow promises.
It's absolutely. Again, your first five was spot on. There's a very simple decision that Americans need to make right now. Are you going to vote for the ideas of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the ideas of a party that wants to give you more freedom and less laws? Or are you going to vote for a party that's going to give you more laws and less freedom? A party that disparages the Constitution as being an antiquated document, something that needs to be deconstructed and recreated in their own image. Are you going to vote for the ideas of abortion, of infanticide? Are you going to vote for the ideas of gender-bending misogyny, where they deny the biological reality of the female? Are you going to vote for the ideas of black supremacy and critical race theory and Black Lives Matter? Are you going to vote for all of these big government ideas, or are you going to vote for the ideas of a party that wants to honor your individual liberty and your dignity? This is a huge decision. And again, I could care less if Donald Trump is a horse's rear end while he defends those ideas. Doesn't make any difference.
Amen to that. You have to know I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I could not agree more. I was going to tell you, our listeners, last night my husband and I went to a political event, and one of the things that the people were talking about is how do you talk to young people kind of smitten by socialism, kind of smitten by the idea somehow America could be better, and if we just changed our system and we became more socialist, we had government providing things, wouldn't that be nicer? And one of the great points the speaker made was, a lot of this big economic theory, socialism and Marxism and capitalism, and they can sound complex, and maybe they can be contorted as they're represented to people. But he was saying, one simple idea is, the question is, who decides? Do you, the individual, decide how to live your life, where you're going to live, how hard you want to work, and then how to spend the money you earn? Or are you going to surrender that who decides question to say, I'm okay with not having the freedom to decide issues in my life anymore. I'm good giving it to the government and letting them decide everything about the future of liberty. Don't you think that's a great, simple little summary?
Oh, absolutely. Again, do you want government or do you want freedom? Do you want more laws and less freedom, or do you want more freedom and less laws? That's the key distinction between the Democrat and the Republican Party right now. One party is a party of big government and control, top-down hierarchical control of your life. That's Os Guinness's language. You have to vote for a hierarchy, the oligarchs who tell you what to do and how to live your life, or you're going to vote for the covenant, the party that honors self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator, and that we have certain unalienable rights and freedoms because of those truths. That's a huge distinction in our election season right now. Big government, or as I would call it, big God. Because if you're worshiping God, all you have to do is have 10 simple laws. That's all He gave us. I've said this before on your show. 10 simple laws. And if you're worshiping God and you live within those 10 simple laws, you don't need government to tell you what to do. You can live freely. That's the way God intended it. One party leans toward that. The other party disparages and laughs at that. That's the difference between the two parties right now.
So well said. And actually, since we're segueing in, talking a little bit more about religion, so Dr. Piper, you're very much beloved, well recognized as a true advocate for faith. First of all, your time as being president of being Oklahoma Wesleyan University, and then your commentary, your columns, your speaking, really speak to the questions about how you take those beliefs and live them in America and in a free country. But I want to get to this. I mentioned before the show, I want to talk to you about this. So I saw that Pope Francis, the Catholic Pope, he heads the Catholic Church, and he has released a new encyclic. I'm going to say it correctly, encyclical. So he has a new encyclical that was just released, his third time encyclical by him, one of the most authoritative genres of papal teaching. So it's a 43,000 word kind of statement by the new pope, by this pope, about his latest insights into how we handle things. He pretty much is coming down on saying that he thinks that the way that the world should handle COVID-19, the way the world should handle economic disparities is to move towards socialism. And he's very openly supportive of socialism, very critical of, as he calls it, market-based economics. And it's just, actually, I'm just going to stop there. What's your reaction, your sense about that in terms of following Scripture versus what he's saying?
Well, I'm always a little, I always say I need to take a spoonful of humility before I criticize a denomination or a church that's within the Christian family other than my own. So I want to make that clear as the context. I'm not Catholic. I have claimed to be evangelical. I'm a born-again conservative Orthodox Christian, but I'm not Catholic. I honor my traditional faithful Catholic friends. And here's what they're telling me about the Pope's encyclical. They are outraged. The conservative, faithful Catholic brothers and sisters view this as their Pope telling them that he is going to defer to government rather than God, that he would rather have more and more government control to solve the problem of human sin rather than having more and more conversions to Jesus Christ as Savior to solve the problem of human depravity and human sin. This is stunning and shocking, and I am speaking on behalf of my conservative, faithful Catholic friends who have told me this, because I asked them before I went on your show, how do you feel about this? And they see it as their Pope making an egregious error, where he's deferring to government rather than having faith and trust in the conversion experience that comes from worshiping God rather than Big Brother.
I'm glad you made those points about the Catholic faith. And I will tell you that I'm also not Catholic, but I have family members and close friends who are Catholic. And really, since the time this Pope became Pope, there have been many people who are conservative by nature, who are Catholic, who do not support this Pope, who just think that what he's saying is off track from what their understanding of their own faith. They don't think, I understand the Catholic faith that the Pope's word is considered to be, I guess, infallible, or at least to be given great credence and deference. But I think many Catholics share this too, this idea that what he's saying doesn't seem consistent with their own understanding of the Scriptures, with their own understanding of this idea that God made man in his image and likeness, and that we, as we're counted in the founding of our country, our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, that we're made by God, by our Creator, and that we have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it's contrary to that. I think that the idea, if you're going to be touting to me, they all jumble together. You get socialism, Marxism, communism, all the isms, big government power. You can't have those and have individual freedom. They seem contradictory.
No. Well, the Pope is a Jesuit, number one. Number two, he has been immersed in liberation theology. That's a fact. Liberation theology, in my view, and I actually went to a school that taught me liberation theology, so I could have been a Marxist. I could have been a radical leftist, because I was taught all of this nonsense while I was in college, while I was being indoctrinated by liberation theology. So I do know a little bit about what I'm talking about right now. Liberation theology is materialistic in its core, because it sees all the problems of humanity as economic and as class-related, class conflict. So it doesn't view man as a moral individual. It views the human being as a materialistic individual. It's Marxist. Everything boils down to what Bill Clinton said. It's the economy, stupid. And if you can just fix the economy, if you can distribute the material issues of life more fairly and equitably, all the problems would be solved. Well, this is crap. That's baloney. And good, faithful Catholics know that. And I need to make this clear. I think I'm right on this. The Pope's words are not infallible unless he speaks ex cathedra. And his encyclical is not ex cathedra. So Catholics have the prerogative of saying, well, thank you, Pope Francis, but I disagree. The only time his words are viewed as infallible is when he speaks officially from the chair of Peter, ex cathedra.
I'm glad you knew that. I did not know that. And actually, as you're saying that, it's ringing a vague bell, so I'm very glad you clarified that. I was going to mention something else, and this I did not have a chance to share with you ahead of time, but there's a Catholic archbishop who has been fairly outspoken in his disagreements with the Pope. This is a gentleman named Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, Vigano. And he has a statement out. This is so interesting, and it kind of ties into what I want to segue into what's happening to the evangelical church in America. But this archbishop says, he's commenting about what the Pope's recent encyclical, the United States is witnessing the highest levels and centers of cultural influence of the American Catholic Church, shamelessly siding in favor of the Democratic candidate, and more generally, in favor of the entire apparatus that has been consolidating in recent decades within the public administration. The deep state, Trump's sworn enemy, is joined by a deep church that spares no criticisms and accusations against the incumbent president while winking indecorously, saying the word correctly, indecorously, with Biden and BLM, slavishly following the narration imposed by the mainstream. Now, I got to tell you, Dr. Piper, I found this too late to get it to you, and so if you don't have any particular thoughts about that, but I was going to say, I think that what he's writing here is essentially saying that the church's teachings are being invaded by, he calls it the deep state church, invading the Catholic Church and contorting what they teach and believe to be in accord with the left-wing, deep state, pro-Biden mindset. And it seems very similar. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And I know I've got limited time because you're at the bottom of the hour. But here's the issue. That Archbishop Vigano is a godsend. Thank God for Archbishop Vigano. He has stood rock solid on the 2,000-year tradition and teachings of the Catholic Church, and he refuses to budge. Some Catholics believe there's going to be a great schism here, and Pope Francis may be on one side and Archbishop Vigano and his ilk on the other side. That's a discussion for a different time, a different place. But here's what I'll say as I close. The schism that Archbishop Vigano may be identifying in the Catholic Church with the Pope siding with a pro-abortion, pro-infanticide, pro-sodomy, pro-big government party and candidate, which is exactly the opposite of what the tradition of the Catholic Church teaches, that schism is taking place in the evangelical church, my church. The evangelicals are having the exact same thing because the woke, affirming emergent evangelicals are just as apostate and guilty of just as much hypocrisy and apostasy as what we've been discussing with regard to the concern over liberation theology and the Pope's encyclical.
Amen to that. You said it so well. That's exactly what I had in my mind, and you're right. The parallels are just, they're stark, and I love the idea that in America we have freedom of religion and freedom to explore our understanding, study the scriptures ourselves, and come to our understanding based along with the insights, of course, by church leaders sharing their views. But I love that there's that freedom of religion in America, and I agree that the invasion of the evangelical movement in America has been overwhelming, the clear invasion, trying to move evangelicals away from the core belief in the scriptures and toward a social justice warrior mentality that picks little pieces of scripture here and there to justify the social justice warrior agenda. That's what we're seeing in the American Christian church today. Dr. Piper, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Thank you, Debbie. Take care.
Great talking to you. Okay, I love every time we have him on. I want to mention a couple of things before on this subject of this interview. He's just a great thinker, a great writer. Dr. Piper is, and I will mention a couple of things about this. I encourage you to read some of these articles that relate to what the Pope had to say, because there's a growing awareness among Americans that there's the insidious, endless effort of the radical anti-American left to push the radical anti-American Marxist, socialist, communist agenda is invading American culture at every turn, at every phase, and every aspect of American life, including in our churches. That we have the American left pushing its radical leftist agenda every place it can, and finding unsuspecting people, finding people not paying attention well enough, not tuned in well enough to what's true, that they become subject to it. They become agreeable to it. They think that this is just the latest way to think. Oh, now we've been told this. Look, we used to believe this, but now we're being told this is what's really true. And all of this, I love that this particular Archbishop Vigano actually talked about that the deep state has within an aspect of it, the deep church, the invasion of the American Christian church. He's speaking of the Catholic Church. Dr. Piper made similar reference to the evangelical, the Christian church, the invasion of the church, pulling them away, the church away from core truth of the scriptures into using the scriptures, bending the scriptures' meaning in order to get the leftist agenda to be considered mainstream and acceptable and in fact tolerable in America. Very, very compelling arguments on the side of Vigano, very compelling time in America for people to be paying attention to what exactly my church is teaching me. And is this consistent with scriptures, or have we been invaded by the social justice warrior, anti-American, Marxist, socialist, communist left that is trying as hard as they can this election cycle to push their agenda? I also want to mention one other thing in this cycle. I was talking to the first five today about what all that seems to be going on in this election cycle. And one thing I've frequently mentioned, and I want to touch on it here, is we watch all of this, the Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and these are Marxist organizations pushing really the destruction of American culture, society, economy, pushing the destruction of freedom and free markets, pushing the radical leftist agenda. Black Lives Matter as an organization and Antifa do this. But sometimes we can think, well, these are just, okay, these are fringy people. These are kind of way out there on the fringe. This isn't mainstream Democrat Party. Well, two things. One is, you did, in the first debate, you had Biden at least say he denounced violence. But I want to be clear, he denounced violence because he almost can't, he has to do that. He can't say, sure, I think it's a great idea that these groups are, burning buildings and burning cars and killing people and stealing things and smashing store windows and looting stores. He can't be okay with that. He's got to at least say he doesn't like that. But he did not denounce the ideology. He did not denounce the ideology behind Antifa or Black Lives Matter. He did not denounce socialism. He did not denounce Marxism. He did not denounce communism. Biden did not denounce anything that the radical left stands for. He just said he shouldn't be violent about it. But you have to understand, he's the guy who's he's not really going to be in charge because he has dementia, but someone will be in charge if he were to be elected, and they're going to push this leftist agenda. And one little tidbit to tell you about this, because we can think, well, okay, so you have extremists, and you have the chicken-hearted mayor of Portland unwilling to crack down, this Portland mayor, instead of insisting that the lawless, violent mobs in the streets of Portland, now they're over 100 days rioting every night, burning things down, destroying things. Instead of taking charge, he just moves out of his own house. He moves out of his own house, or condo, whatever it was, because it was attacked by the Marxists. Instead of saying, you know what, we're bringing in the troops, you're not destroying any more property. So this Ted Wheeler, the Portland mayor, is a coward of cowards, cannot stand up against the Antifa violence, the Black Lives Matter violence. But the most amazing thing is happening in Portland. They're having a mayoral election. And I want you to think about if you lived in Portland and you had a job and you went to work every day and you earned your paycheck and you came home and you paid your rent or you paid your mortgage and you took care of your home, you took care of your family, you took care of your children, and you lived a lawful life, and you're afraid to go out at night, you're afraid in your own neighborhood, so you're looking for a new leader because Ted Wheeler is not willing to clamp down on the violence in Portland. Who would you look to? I mean, who would you want to run? What's your ideal candidate going to be like to end the violence in Portland, to stand up against the Marxist mobs destroying that city? Well, one person who is running and is now polling ahead, is ahead in the polls over Ted Wheeler, is a woman. I sent Matt the wonderful clip, a picture of her. Matt to put it up, and I'll tell you about her. This is the woman. This woman is the one on the left in the skirt. She is running. Her name is Sarah Iarone. I'm not sure the pronunciation, probably Iarone. And this is the woman. Look at her and her outfit. She's running for mayor. She's polling ahead of Ted Wheeler. And the skirt she has on is like a quilt. It's like a quilt featuring pictures of numerous communist dictators whom she supports. She's a pro-Antifa communist, and she is polling ahead of Ted Wheeler. Enough of looking at her. The reason I wanted to mention this to you is this, my friends. You may think, okay, Antifa's crazy, but Portland's full of rational people who are going to vote in a new mayor, who are going to demand law and order. No, do not delude yourselves. Some portions of America are so far gone, including the city of Portland, that the person who is going to defeat Ted Wheeler, apparently, is a communist, a pro-Antifa communist polling ahead of the mayor. And I tell you this to say that there are in this country millions of people as crazed, as anti-American, Marxist, socialist, communists, as Antifa and Black Lives Matter, just because they're not out in the streets burning buildings and burning police cars and killing people, does not mean they don't support this agenda, does not mean that they don't support the Marxist overthrow of America. Listen, I'm trying to get clear to you people. We are watching the impending attempted Marxist overthrow of America, which is why it does not matter what you think about Donald Trump. Love him, hate him. You either vote to preserve America or you vote for the Marxist overthrow of America. That's where we are. When you have the people of Portland, the law-abiding, hardworking citizens who might want peace and safety, they want the communist. They're favoring the communist as the next mayor because this mayor somehow has not humored Antifa and Black Lives Matter enough. Okay, I'll hit two other quick stories, say very, very quickly. One was on polling, and there was an NBC poll, NBC Wall Street Journal poll, giving about the presidential election. And the reason I want to hit this story is sometimes when you see polls and you can see it's done by CNN, I'm assuming most of my listeners go, okay, but that's CNN. It doesn't matter what they poll. They're just, they're just a leftist organization. You ignore them. No one pays serious attention to CNN polls. But this poll I want to tell you about is an NBC Wall Street Journal poll. NBC Wall Street Journal. Now you may think, well, NBC is kind of leftist, but Wall Street Journal, hey, it's probably okay. This poll gave Biden a 14-point advantage nationally over President Trump. Claims in polling that Biden is up by 14 points over Trump. And why I'm telling you this are several reasons. Number one, I said earlier in the show that people keep saying this is a turnout election, and that's not entirely true. It's mostly true, but not entirely. It's an election which is going to come down to whether or not the people you know, your friends, your family, your colleagues, can get over whatever personal dislikes have been planted in their minds by the Democrat media mob in this country against Trump. So they somehow think that the best thing is because they don't like Trump's tweets, Trump's haircut, his conduct or in some personal incident, that they think he's too blustery, whatever their complaint is. There are people in this country who, generally speaking, are opposed to what the left is doing, but they're a little bit afraid, they're concerned, they are easily pushed around with all of the headlines that are anti-Trump. These people are not voters. These are not voters who are set in stone on whether they're going to vote for Biden or Trump. There are plenty of these people. They're your neighbors. They're your Sunday school teacher pal who lives next door. They are your tennis club members. They're your pals who are pretty conservative, normally live conservatively, but they're really, really bothered by Biden or by Trump, and so they're going to vote for Biden just this one time because I don't like Trump. These people need your help. They need you to be speaking up and saying, let me explain what this election is all about. It's not about personality. Who cares what you think about the personality of either person? This is about saving America or losing America. So number one, these polls understand there are people who can be swayed. Number two, in this particular poll, this Wall Street Journal poll, you only had to dig in a little bit to realize even the Wall Street Journal ran with a poll that overpolled Democrats by 30. They polled, and getting the answer to the question, who are you going to support, 35% of Democrats, but only 27% of people polled were Republicans, and 38% were independents. So that's, as they say, a Dem plus 8 versus Republicans. They overpolled Democrats to get this poll result. Do not get put off by poll results like this and think it's over. Do not do that. There are plenty of polls showing, especially in the swing states, that President Trump is doing very well. Do not get disheartened. Do not give up. Do not get thinking that because you saw a poll that had Wall Street Journal on it, that it must be that it's all over, Biden's going to win. These next 4 weeks matter. They matter immensely. They matter every conversation you have, whether you stand up and speak up for this country and what the Trump agenda and what he's done for this country. And it matters if you point out what the left will do to this country if you only give them the chance. There are plenty of polling scams. They have what they call push polls. They have push polls, or I call them agenda polls, where they will call people and say, who are you going to support? And you say, blah. They say, oh, well, would it change your vote if you knew that blah, blah, blah happened? They're actually polling, trying to change your vote. This happens all the time. And then when they get the answer they want, they get the person, they, well, okay, now you tell me that. Now I'm going the other way. Then they use those polls to manipulate ignorant people. Sadly, there is a segment of America that just waits to hear what the polls say about who's going to win. And then that drives who they decide to vote for. Sadly, really, really lamely, but that is a true story. So don't get pushed around by the polls, but don't get comfortable thinking that, oh, look at Trump's rallies, they're so huge. Trump's rallies are huge. The fervor, the excitement, the enthusiasm for Trump is over the moon. The lack of enthusiasm for Biden is evident in every single rally, I use the term loosely, that they ever hold for Biden. They can't even get 10 people in a school gym to show up for him. They can't even get 100 people in a big state. No one's showing up for rallies. So this is the reason it goes back to why it's so important for you all to be speaking up, to recognize there's no enthusiasm for Biden. There's no enthusiasm, except for the radical Marxists. There's not even really enthusiasm for the Biden agenda. A lot of people responding to polls are responding to what they've been told about President Trump. They don't think that he shouldn't have said this. Like my friend I mentioned earlier in the show said, he shouldn't have left Walter Reed earlier than he shouldn't have gotten in the limousine and had a little spin around the hospital to wave to his supporters. He shouldn't have done that. So that's going to drive her to vote for Biden, seriously? We have to recognize the left, the media is at work all day long trying to convince Americans, find some reason that you'll mentally latch on to and say, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Now I'm out. Now I'll go ahead and vote for Biden. Do not let them do this. A vote for Biden is a vote to turn America into Venezuela. Get ready to talk about why that matters, why Trump's personality doesn't matter. Well, all that matters is you're voting to preserve America or you're voting to lose it. That's what's at stake, and don't get pushed around by polls like this. Okay, last quick thing I want to mention. This is a positive note for America and positive note really for President Trump. There are, we happen in America and probably all over the world, people get captured by whatever the top topic is in the headline. So right now, everyone's been talking about COVID. Everyone's been talking about President Trump testing positive, going to Walter Reed Hospital as a temporary, out of an abundance of caution measure. He's fine. He's already back at the White House. He's sounding strong and good. So we have these stories that capture our attention, or stories about, it's COVID, coronavirus, any latest story that the left can dream up to make you hate Trump. Those seem to capture our headlines. But underneath all of that, I want to remind you of some things that are actually happening. One is the Islamization of America, the Islamic supremacist mindset that says they're using immigration to come to America as a means of conquering America for Sharia, for Islam. That's still happening. It's happening while we are diverted, our attention is diverted to be understanding the latest about the coronavirus, the latest news on the vaccine, the latest news on President Trump's condition. All of these things I'm about to mention are all still happening. The Islamization of America is still happening. The cultural jihad in America is still happening. The radical left's determination to instill hatred toward America is still happening in academia, in our public schools from kindergarten through grad school. The radical left's replacement of study of the real American history and replacing that with America, with teaching intended to cultivate hatred of America. The 1619 Project idea, intending to rob American students of understanding the uniqueness of America's founding, the uniqueness and the greatness of America, the greatness of their founding ideas. All that's still happening. The Islamization is still happening. The attack on the America as founded, the attack on love and reverence for the ideas of America are still happening. All sorts of radical leftist attacks on the goodness of America are still happening. And sometimes we can forget, in the light of all that, how many good things have happened in this country, especially and specifically under President Trump. I'm going to dedicate a show soon to just running through, an entire show running through the accomplishments and success of President Trump on massive policy issues, pointing out where we were headed, what the left was trying to do, and where we are now under President Trump. But one thing, I want to close this show with a very upbeat story. So you remember just a few weeks ago, there was a fabulous announcement out of Washington. They had a wonderful press conference where President Trump was announcing, through his work in the Middle East, an agreement between Israel and the Muslim majority nation, the UAE, United Arab Emirates. So the UAE and Israel formed a peace deal. And so they're now working together. And the same thing is happening with Israel and Bahrain and other countries also. President Trump brought about these historic peace deals in great part because he didn't follow the State Department established long-term protocol rule that says you can't get any peace deals between Israel and the surrounding Islamic majority countries until first Israel solves the dispute with the Palestinians. Israel gets to peace terms with the Palestinians. So that's because for decades there has been that kind of unstated rule, or that's actually a very stated rule by the alleged intellectual experts at the State Department, that you can't move forward with Israel until you get the Palestinian deal set up. And President Trump finally said, you know what, we're not waiting. We don't have to wait until we figure out a deal that the Palestinians will accept, because they won't accept anything that makes sense. So he moved forward, got this deal going. So I want to remind people, I'm going to do, as I say, a show running through a lot of Trump's accomplishments, but this one thing, not just that it was a great thing that happened, that he got this deal and got it pulled together, and it's not just President Trump, it's experts, high-level officials, of course, in Israel, and high-level people in UAE and Bahrain. But what I want to mention about this is the practical consequence, the real-life meaning of this deal. Just one example. So there is an Israeli a venture capital organization called Our Crowd, a venture capital group that basically takes in investments from around the world, people who want to invest in startup companies or new companies. They take in investment money and they fund small startups. And they fund startups actually of various sizes, but it's called Our Crowd. And what I'm getting around to telling you, an example of a real-life meaning of a huge step of progress made under the Trump administration in getting to the deal with Israel and the UAE, was that Our Crowd just announced that they signed an MOU, which I'm sure you know, Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, on October 1st. So Our Crowd, based in Israel, always struggling to make deals with the surrounding Islamic majority countries because they had this kind of historic, ancient, hatred or division. Our crowd signed an MOU on October 1st with Abdullah Saeed Juman Al Nubada, chairman of the Al Nubada Investment Company, which is based in the UAE. And so why I say this is a real life meaning, so now you have a deal between our crowd, fabulous set of companies and entities that invest money and entities that they fund. So now you have the prosperity that comes from a venture capital firm, the prosperity spreading into UAE. So now UAE and their investors can be part of and understand this. And our crowd is just a huge name in the Middle East, in Israel and the Middle East. So you have UAE now involved with our crowd and the companies they invest in, they support, which ends up making life better for the average Joe all over the world, and especially the average Joe in the UAE. You're going to bring more prosperity to the UAE, more jobs. You're going to have people investing and probably our crowd investing in companies that the UAE can bring to the table that are going to be part of what our crowd can say, yeah, that looks like a good deal. We'll work on that together. You have people working together outside of government channels, outside of the United Nations, and people is working together to bring good ideas to funding, to fruition, to make life better for people in the UAE and other countries as this idea grows. And I'm getting around to saying, as I close out the show today, there's so much good that's come to this world through having President Donald Trump come on board to win the presidency in 2016 and to move America back to being its position of strength, a standard bearer for liberty, a standard bearer for freedom and free markets and capitalism, a strong leader in the world, a leader in the world that is dedicated to helping to ideas like this, finding solutions, perhaps out-of-the-box solutions, unique solutions. You have a president who was a non-political guy, no political resume, just a vastly successful businessman, bringing those skills, bringing that thinking to the thinking about America, which obviously has blessed America in other ways too, as we have new trade deals, more jobs in America, businesses bringing their companies back to America, so American jobs happening here, which blesses the family dinner table in states all over this country, including especially in the Rust Belt, the heartland America that lost so many jobs. You have so much good coming from the policies and the ideas that President Trump has brought to this country and to the world. We're going to spend, I think, probably Thursday this week talking about that idea, just trying to really recognize how much America has changed because of the policies President Trump brought to the table in America, including this particular example of getting to the point where he got a deal between Israel and the UAE, which ends up meaning jobs, food in the family dinner table, and growing prosperity for people in the UAE. As I do every show, I like to close the show by telling you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we start our show today talking about Trump and saving America. Trump echoes FDR's language, nothing to fear but fear itself, and the left goes hysterical. Don't be afraid. Encouragement of the sick has always been common sense, common decency. I'll tell you, friends, I didn't say it in the first 5, but the idea that he's encouraging people, don't be afraid. This is what you hear people getting all sorts of bad diagnosis, cancer diagnosis, others, heart problems. And it is the fundamental, the message of what you hear from so many people. Don't be afraid. We're going to work on this. Stay calm. We can do this. This message is popular in all sorts of circles. Somehow President Trump says it, and the left is out of their minds. Americans must understand what is at stake in these elections. The left wants Americans to live in fear, to wait for government to tell them what they can and can't do, to snitch on neighbors, to be sheeple, to surrender all freedom. The Portland mayor, good example, is losing in the polls to an open I am Antifa communist. And I say that because real voters are choosing Antifa. It is seriously what is at stake in this election cycle. The 2020 election is about saving America, preserving freedom, full stop. Trump's personality and tweets are irrelevant. Trump's Walter Reed car ride is irrelevant. Voting for the person, not the party, to justify Biden is suicidal nonsense. Biden's party has left the American playing field and joined the Marxists. Vote for America is a vote for Trump, and it is that simple. And on polling scams, polls showing Biden with a big lead are ridiculously flawed, with documented oversampling of Democrats to skew results. The Trump boat parades, the car parades, the rallies with thousands are also a form of polls. Polling in this social media era is primarily a tool of mental manipulation, shaping opinion and pushing an agenda under disguised, contorted questions. Ignore the polls, just vote. And the word is out. Vote in person on November 3rd if you can to help defeat election fraud. Just watch. The turnout for in-person voting will be off the charts high. It's mostly a turnout election, but there's still a few wobbly we need to lift up, and American patriots must turn out on November 3rd to preserve America. And finally, the real meaning of the UAE-Israel deal. Americans need reminding. COVID is not the be-all and end-all of human existence. Life continues throughout the world, and big positive things are happening. Standard foreign policy critique of Trump: he's embarrassing to our allies, he's emboldening our enemies. Always demonstrably false. The Abraham Accords have the potential to be monumentally significant toward peace. The mainstream media has downplayed them because they reflect positively on President Trump. Israeli investment firm Our Crowd announces MOU with a UAE investment firm, working together to fund startups that can improve lives everywhere. Rising above tribalism and religious bigotry. Unthinkable just 5 years ago. A tremendous achievement by President Trump. Reason enough to re-elect. And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Go to our website, please, americacanwetalk.org. Hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my once weekly email. Hit the donate button if you can possibly support our show. This show is listener supported. I truly could use your support. You go to the donate button on the homepage of americacanwetalk.org. You can make a one-time donation or a recurring donation. It'd be immensely helpful to keep this show rolling. But most of all, as I close out this show every week, I want to remind you that we, this generation, as every generation before us in America, we have the precious duty, responsibility, obligation to defend this precious, extraordinary experiment in human liberty that is America. It's our turn. It's our generation's time to defend this great country. This great country is under tremendous assault right here in this 2020 election cycle because the anti-American left will do whatever it can to destroy the fundamental idea of American freedom, the whole concept of the way America was founded. That's what's on the ballot in 2020. That's why it's so important to be involved in every way you can this election cycle. And thank you for listening to my show today, America Can We Talk, which is Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, every week. And thank you so much for listening to America Can We Talk for today, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I will talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you